There's an approach to content creation, especially for video podcasts, that I think a lot of people are sleeping on. And I think that it's a lot more authentic and organic to people's creation style. Yes, you might sacrifice a little bit of reach in the short term, but it will actually yield the kind of content that you like in the first place. Now, let me start with the problem that I think most people run into when they are creating content, right? You find yourself in a position where you're trying to be super contrarian, be over the top in your hooks, trying to get attention, and you eventually feel like you just don't even sound like yourself, right? It's not something, it's a good video, it's a good podcast, it seems like it'll get attention, but you're gonna ruffle some feathers, and it's not really, how you actually sound, right? So it doesn't feel authentic. The next thing that people typically run into is not wanting to sound like a know-it-all. So you want to show that you know some things, but you don't want to sound like you know everything and invite a bunch of trolls to your table, right? So the strategy I'm going to share with you today is called the translator strategy. And the example that I'm going to share with you, there's two examples, but the first one is going to be Ryan Holiday. Ryan Holiday is a very famous author who writes about stoicism. He's had books like The Obstacle is the Way, Ego is the Enemy, and then his latest series are books where he's diving into one virtue per book. There's 4 virtues, and there's one book dedicated to each virtue. He actually just had, one drop in the past few days. It's called Right Thing, Right Now. And I'm using him as an example because I followed his work for over 12 years now. And I used to follow his work back in the day when he was more of a writer and marketer and not really somebody who was talking about stoicism. And so that shift from afar was very interesting to watch, because you're like, man, this person has branded themselves and everything about their expertise around this one topic. How are they going to pull off moving into a completely different sector, right? So I think it was a masterclass to kind of watch that from afar, to where now we all associate him with just, stoicism and things like that, right? We don't even think about the days when he was really a growth hacker or marketer. And so one of the things to take from this is stoicism is something that he did not invent. So most people think that you need to invent this whole genre or a whole new way of doing things just before you can start creating or publishing, right? Stoicism has been around for a very, very long time, okay? What he has done is he's taken the stance of being somebody who's going to research, commentate, and ultimately translate based off of, his experiences, his worldview, right? And Ryan Holiday serves as somebody where we're like, oh, this is an educated person. This person does a lot of research. They're a great writer. They seem to know a lot more about this than I do. I'm going to consume the original text from Marcus Aurelius, but you know what? I'm going to actually put on Ryan's videos or Ryan's pods as well, because I want to hear his interpretation of this stuff. I want to make sure, am I getting this right? Am I missing something? I feel like he's going to give me, an interpretation that I may have overlooked, right? And so that type of trust that you have with somebody is very similar, right, to the type of thing where it's like, if something big in pop culture or the news happens, right? People go, "Oh my gosh, I wonder what Joe Rogan's going to say about this. I wonder what he thinks about this, or I wonder what fill in the blank thinks about this," right? So you begin to think of your favorite personalities or people that you follow and that create content. You wonder what their opinion is going to be on the actual thing, right? So similar vein, you've got this relationship with Ryan Holiday talking about stoicism. Another example that I want to use is Think Media actually posted a video on this where they did an interview with this guy, I'm forgetting his name, but basically he talks about macroeconomics, okay? The thing I found appealing about that whole interview was like all his videos are basically like unedited and uncut, right? And they are recorded in his car, okay? So he's an everyday guy, right? He works at like a lumber company or something like that, right? And his point of view on macroeconomics attracted a whole audience that was like, hey, we're kind of also interested in macroeconomics, but like, I want to hear your interpretations on this thing, right? I don't want to hear, whoever the biggest financial guru is at the moment, right? Like hearing the, what's his name? Jamie Dimon, right? Of Chase Bank, hearing him talk about, his interpretations of macroeconomics is cool, right? You're like, okay, this guy handles a lot of money. He sees a lot of things. He knows a lot of people. That's interesting. I trust what he says, and that's cool. But you kind of, in today's day and age, you don't just stop at one source. You like to go to multiple sources, right? Then what you would do is you'd think, okay, who else is talking about macroeconomics or the way finance works, but talking about it more from like a boots on the ground perspective, right? Like a lot of these people that are already super rich or super famous, they're like up in the clouds, or there can be that perception that this is applicable, but like I don't fully trust it because you're already super up there, right? Versus when you have somebody like an everyday dude who's like, all right, I'm taking the time to research this for you guys. I'm also trying to learn this myself, and I'm extending this to you as well. There's a different appreciativeness about that type of content, right? And it becomes something where he was saying in that video too, where it's like, if he got an office or a full out decked out studio or got a really nice car or something, like that would affect like his audience. Are like, we're not going to be there if you if you do that, right? They want him to stay in the car. They want it to be super kind of relatable and lo-fi, right? Which is actually a real benefit for somebody who's like, you know what, I'm going to be doing hours of research on this thing I'm already interested in, and I'm going to give you my point of view based on what I'm seeing and hearing, right? So basically, that's another example around, how this translator strategy works. The reason that it is actually a doable perspective is because you're reacting to things, right? You're not coming up with everything from scratch. You're taking something that's already a tested, proven thing that people are interested in, and there are communities around, and you're kind of attaching yourself to it, right? But also when you attach yourself to it, it can feel weird and, like, I don't know if I fit in here, right? The way that this removes that whole thought process is because you are simply taking the approach of a researcher or translator, right? So when you are taking that approach versus, I'm going to share the 10 best things that you should be doing, to make use of the macroeconomic economy or whatever, right? Like you sound like you know it all, and you're crazy. Like it just sounds, you probably feel weird even making that kind of video. But if you take the stance of recording a podcast that was like, 5 things I learned from this book on macroeconomics, right? People are going to go, whoa, okay, like I read that book too. Let me double check. Like, let me see if this is a refresher. Let me see if you got the same thing that I got out of it, right? Am I missing something, right? And so you're reacting to a book that's already proven, that's already, people are reading it, and you're giving them an analysis on that, right? So Ryan Holiday is probably the most successful person who's doing this in like a mass way that I think goes underappreciated, because it's like the amount of content and media that's actually produced from him is absolutely insane on a daily basis. But he's doing it because he has found his strategy. He's found his point of view, which I think takes a lot of time for anybody who's creating. It takes time to get to that and find that. And I think that there's only there's some people who take the stance of like, here's how I got a 6-pack. Let me show you how I did, right? And that's super valuable too, because it's like you are the case study. You are the person who's speaking from your experiences. But even with that strategy sometimes, right, if you try to talk about stoicism from like your point of view of how you deal with and experience things, right, you might still feel like hesitant to do that. It might feel like, yeah, that's cool, but I don't know about that. Versus there's another perspective, which could be the researcher, right, where you're like, okay, I'm going to actually mine for and find this stuff, because you know what, my viewers, they don't have the time or energy to be doing this, right? They just want to tune into somebody who does. The next example that I want to give you is actually a show called Breaking Points. So it's hosted by Crystal and Sagar. It is a really good show if you're trying to stay kind of like informed on politics, but you hate the idea of like, watching all the main news channels and like sorting through them. The way that Crystal and Sagar have developed this like, channel and podcast that's like really, really big and kind of a household name now, to the point where other mainstream establishments are airing some of their stuff and like sourcing those clips, right? The reason that they've been able to do this is because they become the trustworthy translators, right? So we go, okay, I like you both. I think you're both sensible. And there's kind of a unique concept to the show. One's person's on the left, one person's on the right, but they can still be in the same room and, have disagreements and discussions and that kind of stuff. So that makes it interesting, obviously, too. But that also makes you go, you know what? I trust this point of view. I trust this perspective more. This translation is going to be a little more trustworthy than an all right, platform, all left platform or whatever. So now what you think is when something in the news happens and you follow, let's say, breaking points, and you're like, okay, this is what CNN or BBC or Fox News or whatever is saying about this event. I wonder what Sagar thinks about this. I wonder what Crystal thinks about this. And then you're excited when they drop a video or an episode where they're covering that exact thing. They're giving their commentary and translating that event into a way that, people with boots on the ground can actually understand, right? So we're also trusting in their intelligence, right? So like, hey, you know a lot more about this than I do. You care more about this than I do. Your whole job all day is to be looking and paying attention to the stuff and recalling history and things like that I just can't do because of other things I'm doing, for my job and throughout the day, right? So that's a third example I wanted to point out of like how you can become a trusted translator just by having a perspective, right? You likely already have a point of view or perspective on the topics or things that you want to be talking about, right? It's just exercising this point of view and this creation style, because a lot of times when you hit record and you turn on the camera, like you go into the mode of like, oh man, I need to sound less dumb. I need to, look smarter than I am. Like, and before you know it, you're not in the translating strategy anymore. You're feeling like you're the know-it-all, right? So taking this approach of being a translator is definitely something that is similar to curation, right? People who are journalists and curate on events and things that have already happened. Like, they weren't responsible for all those events actually happening. Their job was simply to pay attention, find, report, and bring it to the masses, right? That resonates too with me a little bit, but at the same time, I think the level up is being the translator, because you're not just reporting on the events, right? You're taking the event and you're applying your perspective, your worldview to it in such a way where it kind of takes on a life of its own, right? So that finance example that I used, or macroeconomics, let's switch over to, let's just say like financial advice, right? There's a lot of people out there who give financial advice, okay? You've got 5 different creators, let's say. Creator number 1, they are a multimillionaire, okay? And they're giving financial advice. Creator number 2 is a single mom who has made a great life for herself. Maybe not a millionaire, but whatever, makes a decent amount of money, seems happy. Okay, her perspective. Number 3, Dave Ramsey, right? Number 4, Ramit Sethi, right? Number 5, the CEO of Chase Bank, right? So you've got these 5 different personalities that are all giving advice, right? But each of them have a different flair, right? So if you are also, let's say, a single parent, you might go, oh, you know what? This person is going to give way more accurate advice and understand my situation way more than Dave Ramsey or Jamie Dimon, right? So you begin to kind of attach yourself to the things that are unrelated. It's kind of like you wouldn't think that that's something that would differentiate you right away, but that's just because that's the default life for this person. It does actually forge a certain perspective, right? Somebody who is already a millionaire or resonates with making a lot of money and all that kind of stuff, right? You're going to be a little more drawn to maybe that person's advice, right? They're all saying a lot of the same things at its core, but they're packaging it up in massively different ways that actually will be absorbed by somebody who is kind of like them, right? So that differentiation is something that I think is actually worth paying attention to, because over time, this is what's made it possible for there to be multiple channels, multiple accounts, multiple, podcasts that people will actually listen to and follow. It's because we're looking for something that gives us a thread of connection. And the last example that I'll point out is actually, I experienced this like when I hurt my lower back when I was like 19. I herniated a disc. That kind of kicked off a lot of my fitness career and became a specialty of mine later on too. But I remember how frustrating it was when I was trying to find, a physical therapist or a chiropractor who understood the types of physical activity that I did, right? So this one chiropractor worked with the Flyers players and, the Philadelphia Eagles and the Phillies and all that kind of stuff, right? But he did not really like the types of workouts and things that I was doing, right? And kind of made it clear that oh, that's not as good as this thing is over here, right? So even though this person's super smart, super qualified, they know how to fix me technically, right? You put that person up against another option who is like, hey, I like the type of workouts that you do too. I do them myself, actually. And you know what? The injury advice and all that stuff that I'm going to be giving, the way that I treat people, keeps that in mind. It allows you to get back to doing that thing. I go, whoa, okay. That, there's entire markets that were created based off of that, right? CrossFit specifically. So CrossFit people that were doing that, right? Other doctors, other physical therapists for years did not resonate, understand, or help those people. It was really just oh yeah, you shouldn't be doing that. Oh, that's crazy. You know what I mean? Versus the physical therapist or the practitioner that actually understood CrossFit, did it themselves, and not just that, but engineered their treatment process to help you kind of get back to doing some of those things. That person had massive value in the eyes of somebody who was doing CrossFit, even recreationally, not even the professional people, right? But just recreationally. You felt more comfortable going to a doctor that was also a CrossFitter, or they had patients that did CrossFit and they didn't just tell you, don't do it, or I don't know what that is, right? So that is a real life example of how this works when you're choosing people to work with, you're choosing certain practitioners, right? That translator concept applies there as well, right? So the person who is a doctor and does CrossFit versus the doctor that doesn't do it or doesn't work with patients that do that has the ability to translate that same information in a way that, let's say, the CrossFitter will actually listen to and appeal to. The same goes with any other sport, right? A doctor that works with runners and specializes in that. They're not just going to tell you, oh man, your knees are going bad, just stop running, right? Do water aerobics. They're going to tell you, okay, cool. This is what I typically see. This is what I typically do. And they make you feel like, I get you. You're not crazy, right? So that's the essence of, I think, this translator point of view and strategy when it comes to creating content, but more specifically, creating podcast content. And so I hope this was helpful. I'm so curious to hear what you think about this. And make sure to check out all the free stuff and whatnot in the description below. I hope there's a thread or two that you can take with you and implement into the next piece of content that you create. But I appreciate your time. Thank you for hanging out, and I'll talk to you soon.